Thanks for taking time to listen in on a conversation Dick, Joe Saward, and I had of the 2026 Austrian Grand Prix. George Russell won the race. He also spent the closing laps losing time to both of the men behind him. Max Verstappen showed up with what Dick called a new weapon, and Red Bull was suddenly back in the fight. Kimi Antonelli, after going off twice on the opening lap, found himself closing in on his own teammate. As you'll hear, Joe thinks 2 more laps might have changed who's holding the trophy. Before we get to our conversation, though, I need to ask, can you help us out? If this show adds value to your F1 experience, please take a moment to follow us and give us 5 stars on your favorite podcast app. Share this episode with other F1 fans. That's how people find us, and it's how we keep growing this community. Hope you enjoy our conversation. All right, gentlemen, it is just a few days after the Austrian Grand Prix. I'm really excited to have both of you here to chat about it. I think, if anything, let's just get straight into it. What was your race highlight, Dick?
Oh, I loved the opening battle between Lewis and Max. That was just I thoroughly enjoyed it. 2 just supremely gifted racers going at each other, and, the opening laps I thought were really, really fun to watch, and it was good to see Max being provided with a upgraded car. I would call it a new weapon. And, he was back being Max. I mean, Max has always been Max, but now he's got the car to to show that. I think that there were a lot of storylines, but that's the part that I enjoyed the most. Those guys went at each other so hard, and it was just beautiful to watch.
What about you, Joe?
Well, I thought the fact that Red Bull was back in the game was great news. Whether it's Red Bull or whether it was Max is another argument, which I'm sure we can get around to. But he it was spectacular, and um, I don't think George. I mean, George was fortunate all weekend. He was fortunate to get pole position with that yellow flag incident. And then he was fortunate to be able to build a lead while everyone else, when Kimi was sort of throwing the car all over the place and the others were delaying each other. Um, and so I think that, towards the end, they were both catching. Man, I reckon if there'd been 2 more laps, Kimi might have beaten the pair of them, which was, it was good fun to watch. Anyway, it certainly was exciting because, we had Max closing on George and Kimi closing on both of them. So
Mhm.
that's what Grand Prix racing is all about. It should be exciting right to the flag, and that certainly was. I think the I don't know what it was. The margin of victory wasn't huge, but Kimi was only 3/10 behind at the flag, um, Max, and that was pretty impressive. But I thought Max was brilliant. It's great when you see a proper pro going at it full time, big time. Um, it's just good to see. And, it's just then, last weekend or the week before last in Spain, we had Lewis. Uh, sure, the Mercs are there, but, we need the McLarens to up their game a bit, though.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, actually, you ended up saying a couple of things that were my questions for later on, but I'll say my highlight and then we'll move on to that, Joe, is I think the location, the beauty of where this race occurs is always something I look forward to every year, and the enthusiasm of the fans there. I know there are different times on the calendar, we note that a lot, but I feel like the Austrian Grand Prix always provides that level of just devotion to the sport, I think, and then also to their home team. It's something I look forward to. Joe?
Yeah, can I just say at this point that you need to be devoted to get to the Austrian Grand Prix because it is absolutely in the middle of nowhere and there's no accommodation. So, in previous years, I've driven for an hour in the morning and an hour in the evening to get in and out of the track because that was the closest place I could find that was affordable. A lot of people go there and stay in tents, which is actually not a bad idea, except, obviously you need to work or eat or do anything other than listening to drunken Dutch people. It is, um, it's not really an option. But it's important to say that. And the other thing is also that you need to bear in mind that these are not local fans necessarily. That most of them were Dutch, and they drive the 700 miles or whatever it is from the Dutch border down to the every year they do it. It's amazing to watch. It's like if you're on the autobahns of Germany, it's like just watching the entire sort of armored division of Holland going south.
Also, on the heels of what we're experiencing here in the United States regarding the World Cup and all the enthusiasm of fans from around the world showing up here and this cultural exchange, I think it's kind of cool that this is something that happens year round in a much different scale when it comes to this exchange of people just migrating because of their love for a sport and the festival atmosphere. It's wonderful. I think it's the human aspect of the sport that I just really love, is seeing the generational aspect of it, people who are coming from different communities. And as you said, if the Dutch coming in, I mean, I've got to imagine the people who every year go, oh, this is when it's happening. And you just kind of know that this is part of your life.
They take every single euro out of the Dutch pocket. Believe me. I mean,
I love it.
the accommodation, the restaurants, everything costs silly money because they can get away with it.
I mean, that's the business of the sport too, right? So I'm okay with that. I think it's fantastic. So I guess my highlight took us a little bit off the track, but I want to go back to the track. And you highlighted a question, you answered a question, and I want to make sure, Dick, you also chime in. I wondered if the race had just been a couple more laps, would Kimmy have moved up in the standings? And it made me really excited to see that. But can you go a little bit more, Joe, on your thoughts of what led you to say that? Like, what were you seeing in Kimmy's drive? I mean, he started in fourth. What did you think of his race overall?
Well, he started in fourth, which was unfortunate because he probably shouldn't have been there, but he was. Then he went off twice on the first lap um, because I think probably he couldn't get any heat in his brakes or his tires, one or the other, or both. The Red Bull ring is very difficult for those kind of things. Anyway, he was on it right from the very beginning, and then the pit stops were on different sequences, and Kimi had a lot more tire left at the end than the others, which is why he was able to close in, and he was coming in at probably half a second a lap um, in the closing stages. And George was fading away fast because he had much older tires, and Lewis was he had slightly younger tires than sorry, not Lewis, Max had slightly younger tires than Kimi, but slightly older tires than Kimi. Sorry, but in the end, Kimi had a tire advantage and a car advantage too. I'm sure.
Well, I think that's interesting for 2 reasons. One, I remember during the race, George was kind of nudging, it felt like the garage, if you wanna bring in Kimmy in, and if that had been followed through, if they had decided to put Kimmy in a position where he was more in supporting role of George, I did wonder if that would have affected his race differently in the sense of what we're saying now, that just a couple more laps he probably could have won. The second, there was so much post-race questions, commentary about the decision of when Kimmy got called in, when Carlos Sainz car ended its race and the yellow flag and when the timing. And those two things, as much as they were discussed, I have to wonder if by staying steady into their decision making, that is what allowed Kimmy to keep in that position, that if, again, he'd had 2 more laps, maybe he would have significantly made a difference in his standings. Do you see where I'm kind of analyzing about the strategy calls
Yeah,
that Mercedes was making?
yeah. I think with the strategy call that Mercedes made didn't look good in the end, but there was nothing wrong with it when they made it. It just depends on the length of the virtual safety car, and
Yeah.
who knows? Because it's not even the race director who decides that; it's how long the marshals take to do stuff. Um, so basically, I think it was the right call when they did it, but it became the wrong call because the virtual safety car was cleaned up, and done very quickly. So he didn't get the free pit stop he was hoping for. But in the end, I'm not sure it made a huge difference. It might have made a little bit of a difference, but I don't think it would have been. Um, I don't know. I mean, maybe he could have won it if he hadn't come in as early as he did, but then he got an advantage at the end of it all. So you know, it works both ways. So I don't think you can criticize the team. They had to make a call. They made the call. They had about not many seconds to make that call, and they made it. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah. Dick, what are your thoughts?
Well, I thought it was interesting that it took them a little bit of a gap between when they threw the yellow to when they go to the virtual safety car. I mean, to me, it's sort of like if you have a car that just comes to a stop on any part of the track where they're on the track, stopped. Why wouldn't you go straight to virtual safety car? Or full course safety car. um, I don't
Can I
understand
can
that.
I can I leap can I leap in here? That's a very American attitude, if I may say so.
Mm.
In American racing, the minute anything, if a fingernail falls out the window, they throw a yellow, and
This is true.
sometimes I think it's very fake. And any car that stops, they immediately have a yellow. So in Europe, there's a little bit more leeway, and there's a little more sort of, um, is this going to be something that needs everyone to slow down, or can we keep going? And that's what happened in qualifying. To be fair, George went past where Max had gone off, on the last lap in qualifying. Now he did lift off. There are plenty of arguments about whether that's sensible or not. He took pole position on a lap which was yellow, single yellow flag, not double yellow. But even if even if it was in theory legal, is that right? Should there be, if there is a yellow flag, there is a danger. Um, and should the pole position man, just because he lifted off and lost a couple of tenths, does that not constitute a breach of the regulation? It's an interesting argument, but that's going away from the thought, what we were discussing. But basically, I think it's in Europe. It takes a bit more time. I mean, it's heading towards the American way, but because you seem to have virtual safety cars and safety cars for anything these days, whereas in the old days, a car a car broke down, they'd have a yellow, and the guys would push it off, and they go back racing again.
Mhm.
Um, so and nowadays, I'm not sure if I like that very much, but I understand why, safety wise, they have to do it.
Yeah, I look at it from a couple of standpoints. I think from the American perspective, you're right. They do throw a yellow or a safety car pretty much any time, right? And the reason I think is that we kinda got used to that because at one stage, road racing really was not that big of a thing in the United States. It was more the ovals, which are on a contained circuit. There's no shoulder to put a broken car off on the side. And so I think it's almost like muscle memory now. Because on many road courses, to your point, Joe, push the car off to the side and keep going. No big deal.
Yeah,
Right?
there's also another element in American psychology, I suppose you'd call it, which is the insurance issue, um,
Mm.
where there is a fixation on in insurance lawsuits, you name it, much more so than elsewhere, and I think that permeates through the um, the thinking process. It is, oh my God, there's a risk, stop it.
Yeah.
And even if it's subconscious, I'm sure it's there.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, getting a marshal run over, that's would not be good, and on so many levels. So, yeah, interesting. A great point.
Well, and I was going to say, I think also it goes back to some of our other conversations about cost benefit analysis that we do differently across the two communities. We talked about kids and parenting in one of our episodes, the one about why we don't see more American racers on the grid. And we talked about parenting styles of kids going away to boarding school in the European context, where here that's more uncommon. It's not common. That's the best way to put it. And I think that goes back to the way that we just look at risk. I think both of you are insightful on the shoulder and the circuit versus the insurance and explaining like why that happened and the timing or where the George aspect of decision, knowing the rules. Those are some of the comments that I saw people saying, he knew the rules well enough to know that this was a liftoff would be sufficient in that moment. So actually, Joe, I did want you to kind of explain a little bit about the whole quali yellow flag issue. I know you wanted to kindly not go too far onto that in the previous question, but I'd love for you to just kind of explain it a little bit more for those who might not understand what happened.
Okay, well, normally when there's an accident and a car hits the wall, you have um, normally when the car hits the wall, you have double yellows. But on this particular occasion, for whatever reason, it was decided it was a single yellow, and that meant that George realized this, lifted in the sector, and still managed to get pole position because he was going fast enough to prove that in that sector on the track he had lifted off and gone slower than previous laps, and yet still take pole position. Whereas Kimi lifted off completely, assuming it was a double yellow, and he admitted later he made a mistake. As to how that decision is made, it's down to the race director. Um, Fundamentally, and race control as a group. And, it can be a little bit, normally there's a lot of rules they follow, but it can be a little bit subjective. And I think this was one of those occasions when it was subjective.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I felt like there was that discretionary aspect that left it open just enough. Even just listening to George and his commentary, people's commentary afterward, noting his very quick words about the rules, I thought, yeah, he knows the rules well enough to know that this might be that gray area of discretion and that might be controversial to some, but it's also shows your experience and also the thinking in that moment as the last seconds of your attempt to get through Q3 and you've got to put it all on the line to have the wherewithal to say those words of I've lifted off. I thought what shows just the mental acumen of a race car driver, and especially at this Grand Prix level and for someone who wants to be the champion. So, I mean, I don't wanna go too much more into that, but I just wanted to say I thought that was a very interesting situation, and I always like the gray areas. So, unless you guys wanna keep talking about that, I'd like to move on to Ferrari.
Let's do it.
Okay. How does this race fit in the context of the season story for Lewis? I would say particularly after the Barcelona win. Joe, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think that goes back to the point I made after Barcelona, which is don't think this is Ferrari back on top, because it wasn't. And clearly, they they had pace in qualifying, but in the race, forget it. They were going backwards from the beginning. So there's a fundamental issue. They had upgrades. They were happy. The drivers were happy with the upgrades, but there's still something that's not there, which is mainly called horsepower, I think. So, um, and we'll see. It was also, remember, it was a very hot day and the tires were fading, uh, and maybe the brakes. Ferrari had a few brake problems over the weekend. I mean, it wasn't as catastrophic as Cadillac had both cars out with brake failure after a couple of laps, wasn't it? It was ridiculous. Um, but it was, they were clearly not there. And by the end of the afternoon, they'd sort of drifted well back. So the car's got pace, but it just hasn't got it all. And it's the same, the McLaren hasn't got quite as much pace, but sometimes I'm sure it can be on, a decent level.
Dick, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it pretty much mirrors what Joe was saying. I think, Lewis was told, I don't know, midway through the race to go to mode TS, I think is what they called it. And he was like, why would I do this? Because I don't have any power anyway. And, it was a little bit of a back and forth with his pit wall. And it was because the engine was overheating. And so, as an engine overheats, it loses power. So, are they down on power? Yeah, they're down on power anyway. And then they're dialing back to a very conservative mode to just keep the engine, alive. And so they even lost more ground there. And then, the tire deg was a real issue. And, some of it, no doubt, was the heat. I was a little surprised because, Barcelona had some pretty high tire deg. They seemed to be okay there. But this particular type of tire deg, it was different. And I guess it's because the temperatures were just so much hotter in Austria. I thought it was interesting, as a little bit of a sidebar, George made a comment on the radio during the race. He says, "Hey, the tires are overheating, but only at the surface," and implying that the carcass of the tire itself, he did not feel like it was overheating, which says to me that there's an amazingly delicate touch there that he can feel the difference between a surface thermal issue versus a complete carcass issue. So, I thought that was interesting too. But yeah, I agree with Joe. I think Ferrari is thereabouts, but I don't think they're there yet.
I think one needs to add to that that the Red Bull Ring is a very specific kind of circuit because you've got a lot of sustained high cornering speeds, and that means that the tires get punishment. Unlike other places, there are one or two places like it, but and the brakes get a lot too because there's two massive braking, and then beyond that, it's just there are two fast braking, uh, two very hard braking bits, some relatively short straights, but really it's just fast cornering all the time. And so if the car's nailed to the floor, that's fine. It doesn't start to slide, but if it starts to slide, that overheats stuff. So,
Mhm.
and it's a different kind of overheating, So I think that is, that may be the weak point that Ferrari had. Who knows? I mean, they'll know because they've got the,
Mhm.
but we don't know. We
Sure.
don't have the data. So.
Yep. Great point.
So moving on to McLaren, where were they at the race? Do you think this same conversation about where Ferrari was seeming to have challenges, could that be extrapolated and placed onto McLaren and their situation, or is there something bigger happening there?
Yeah, no, I think Lando said it over the weekend. He said, we're 3 months behind, and I think we're trying to catch up, and good work is being done, but we're 3 months behind in the development race, and that's what it means. So I know Oscar had a pretty good weekend really, but he wasn't able to challenge seriously. I mean, you can. The thing is that you've got to look at the race and qualifying differently, obviously, because a quick car is a quick car in qualifying, but in a race, it's a different set of parameters. You've got to keep on doing it lap after lap after lap, and that's where Mercedes is strong, and the others are less strong. So
It led me to have this question. If Max or Lewis had been in either of those cars, do you think that they would have been able to extract more out of them, despite the fact that, as you said, Lando noted that they're 3 months behind?
um, no, I think it's just you just got to do the work. It's that's n- that either the others have got to make a mistake or you've just got to. If everyone's working full out all the time, the pecking order will remain the same. So you've got to work doubly hard, to make things happen. It's a complicated thing. So
Dick, agree, disagree?
Yeah, I agree. And we kind of saw it with Max. The car, at Barcelona wasn't horrific. It wasn't on the pace, but it wasn't horrific. You bring in a new package, and all of a sudden, Max is clearly um, got like I said earlier, he's got a weapon that he can work with now, and I think it all boils down to the car. And if you don't have the car, it doesn't really matter how good of a driver you are. You've got to have that car underneath of you, and then execute really, really well um, to be able to be, in the frame for a win. So, um, yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of where my head's at.
okay.
Well, that kind of led to the question I was going to ask about Red Bull, which is, did you think going into the race that Max was going to be a threat?
Max he's always good at the Red Bull Ring. It's just a place he excels. Um, but did I think they were going to be that close? No, I didn't. And I think you saw that with Isaac. He wasn't far behind, but he wasn't on it like Max was. Um, and Max is just exceptionally good at that place.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Dick, any other thoughts before we move on to the middle of the pack?
Well, I was impressed not only with Max, of course, but I thought that is a better indicator of Red Bull and the changes that they have made. You think about Isaac and and how he is developing. He's not being just completely steamrollered by Max. Yes, Max is obviously on the scorecard, you know, much further ahead of Isaac, but it's not like what we've seen in years past with the second car. And I think this has a lot to do with the culture that is now in place at Red Bull, because Helmut Marko's not there anymore. And I mean, that's what I'm putting it on. I think Laurent Mekies has gone and done really a fairly rapid shift in culture. Usually culture in an organization takes a long time to get that, um, to affect the cultural change. It takes a long time to do that. He's done this very quickly. And I really think that he's in a situation where a young Isaac is in a situation where, he's being allowed to grow and to still be a sophomore in Formula One on a very big team with a spotlight right on him, you know? And, I think he's doing admirably well at this stage.
I agree with that entirely. The Marco factor having gone is deeply significant. I'm not sure it was a deep culture there. I think it was just Marco and to some extent Christian as well. Were very much sort of black and white in the way they look at things. This guy's not good enough. Boom, get rid of him. I think Christian left, but
Mhm.
less so than Helmut. Helmut was very much that sort of if he's not good enough, he's not good enough. Um, and there's no
Yeah.
there's no chance to let them grow. So I think that's probably explaining it. And then Isaac Isaac can beat himself up better than anybody else I know in the grid. I think. I mean, he's actually not true. Lando's a massive self destruct mode. Um, but Isaac is very, very critical of himself, which is a good thing on the one hand, if it's not too much. You don't undermine your own confidence. But Isaac seems to be pretty.
Mhm.
He's pretty confident in his own ability, and he absolutely admits mistakes, and that's good. So um,
Mhm.
and I think that's reflected a little bit in the result. Is he ultimately going to catch up with Max? No, he's not. But that's well, it's very unlikely that he is. I don't think he's in the same league. But then again, there aren't many people in Formula One who are in that league. So um, I think that's just everybody has a level that they can get to, and as much as you want to improve it, there's a level you can't get to if you're not one of these. If you don't have the magic extra tenth here and there.
Mhm. Joe, do you think that Isaac might be that guy though that could play Robin to Max's Batman? If you'll if you'll take that analogy where um, he can come in and score really good solid points while Max is winning, and if something happens to Max, ultimately, maybe not this year, but maybe in his third season, whatever, where he could actually step up and challenge for a win. Do you think that he would be that kind of guy?
I think that if you look at Perez, kind of did that for a while, but I think an element of that was luck. And then Perez was, in the start of whichever year it was, Perez was lined up there, battling for the world championship for the first three races. And then Max got things together again and basically spammed him. And but he remained there. And then after that, he just played it away. And the last year was embarrassing, So I think it's a little bit dependent on the mental strength. It's dependent on the support around you. It's dependent on lots of different things. I mean, these guys have all got super talent, but Max has got super talent.
Me too.
You know.
Yeah. He was genetically bred to be a racing driver.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely right. They mixed up the right DNA.
Got it really, really right.
Well, I mean, it does beg the question because now he is there's a child between him and Nelson Piquet's daughter, so there's got to be some DNA in that too, I should think.
Yeah.
But you know, I don't know if she wants to be a racing driver, but um, she, she's still very young at the moment. But yeah, I mean, they are. I don't know. It's interesting, isn't it? The sort of social elements of Grand Prix racing leading to uh, manufacturing racing.
That's right. That's right. Oh, too funny.
Well, I think that if anything, she's still in diapers from what I remember. So we'll give her a little bit of time and then we can see if this theory holds. But I do think also one piece that when I look at this comparison between Sergio, Isaac, and Max is also the trajectory of where Max was in his own career. And in comparison to the second seat driver, I wonder if there is I don't want to say settledness. It kind of implies resignment, but that's not what I mean. But like Max has got it, and he's not trying to prove anything to anyone but to himself. And he seems very at peace and enjoying, and hasn't said, "I don't want to keep racing." That's by any mention. But like the partner, teammate, rival aspect of it, I think it has a different dynamic, that just watching their interaction with one another. And then you add that into all the other things that you guys have already mentioned, or the cultural environment of Red Bull, let alone all the other stuff. I can see why Isaac is able to give a different vibe off of what he's experiencing versus any of the other people that were there in that second seat. So moving on to the middle of the pack, because time is getting past us. Any thoughts about Alpine, Racing Bulls? I will say I thought the Racing Bulls team was actually underrated. I mean, they came in P9 and P10, and I don't think in the middle of the pack. I thought that was really good for them. Solid performances. Again, another home team-ish performance. Haas, any thoughts about that? We did touch on the Williams, Carlos Sainz's car ending its race, and more the implications for the yellow flag. But any thoughts about any of those teams, any of those drivers?
Yeah, I think Williams were never going to get anywhere all weekend because the car is heavy, and at the Red Bull ring, same point about sustained cornering speed. If you got more weight, you do more damage to the tires, and basically that damages the lap time. You slide around more because you're pushing more weight around, and so they were always going to be in trouble. They knew they were going to be in trouble. They didn't know that Charles Leclerc was going to break down, but they knew they weren't going to do very much. And again, that's a little bit circuit specific. They've still got work to do getting rid of weight, but you know they're not too far off. And I think once they get the car closer to the weight limit, we'll see a much better performance later on.
Dick, any thoughts about the middle of the pack?
Yeah, I think, to your point, I thought Racing Bulls did well, obviously the other team using a Ford engine. And so I think that they did very well. I, as a fan of the Williams team, have been for decades. I'm sorry to see them struggling. They had really, I thought, over the last couple seasons, they've been showing progression and progress. And then this year, they've obviously taken a pretty big step back because, like Joe said, their car is just grossly overweight, I guess. And I think it's Monza, Joe. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I heard Monza that they're going to have pretty much a new car that would bring them back to the, you know, close to the weight limit. So Hopefully we'll see a little bit of a resurgence there towards the last of the season for Williams, because that car needs to be on a diet.
Yeah. I think, I mean, we've discussed this before. I think that the reason the car is heavy is one based on the production problems that they have
Yes.
because their manufacturing base wasn't strong enough. So, um, you can say, well, they could have done a better job lightening it. The fact is, they just had to hurry to get it out, and then they had to make compromises they didn't want to make. So, in lots of ways, they know how to fix the problems. Um, they need to have the time to do that, and they need to have in future the production capacity not to do the same thing again.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's move to the back of the grid. Any thoughts about Audi, Aston Martin, or Cadillac? I think we mentioned Cadillac and the unfortunate lack of completion of the race, but anything other than that?
No big surprise with Cadillac because I think that they talked too much of a game early on. I think that they've got a hell of a lot to learn, and I think this is part of the learning process. The biggest problem they have is, what have they sold to the people paying for it? What is their argument where they were going to be compared to where the reality is? I think the reality is something that most people with experience in Formula One knew they weren't going to be great. And I think they might have oversold it a bit, but we'll see. Um, Aston Martin was exactly where one would expect to see them at the moment, and nothing's going to change there until they basically build a new car. And Audi, I think they were suffering from a lack of power more than anything else as well. Um, but I don't think there's anything really exciting to report down the back.
Dick, what about you?
Well, I made what I thought was a very interesting observation in FP3. Um, when we're talking about Aston Martin, there was George. It was towards the end of FP3, and they had the onboard video of George setting the lap that ultimately left him at the top of the timesheets in FP3, and he's going around the lap, and way off in the distance, you see the speck of a car. And with each succeeding straightaway, I mean, George's car is just gobbling up the car that's in front. And this is not a car that's on a cool down lap. It's not a car that is preparing its tires. This was a car that was actually trying to set a lap time. And literally, it became clear it was Lance Stroll, and it became clear that through every corner and especially going down the straightaways, that Mercedes was gobbling up the Aston Martin, and the difference in speed, because I think a lot of it was the power of the Mercedes versus the Honda, and then certainly that chassis of the Aston Martin, it's not any good either. But man, oh man, the difference between those engines was unbelievable, and I was like, "Oh my goodness." Um, it's just they've gone bear hunting with a switch, as we'd say. I mean, they just have no shot. And, it was such an eye opener for me at just how bad Aston Martin really is right now. It's sad. I feel sorry for everybody on that team right now. I mean, hopefully they'll get it right with the new car when they bring it out, but good grief. It was bad.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I'm looking at the clock and realizing we are getting to our day jobs calling moment, but I wanted to say if people haven't already, I'm plugging you, Joe, is they need to make sure and read this week's, well, they should read it every week, the JSBM newsletter. But I loved your articles in there that were about silly season for so many people who like to get so caught up in the drama. I thought the way that you articulated putting silly season into context and being very thoughtful was so great and so worth the read. The other was the implication of the calendar related to both 2026 but also 2027 and what's going on in the Middle East region. So those are must reads in my opinion. I mean, again, I
Yep.
think everybody should be reading the JSBM every week. So if you aren't doing that,
Absolutely.
where you do that.
It was excellent stuff.
There's one thing I felt was noticeable at the weekend, and it's not going to please American fans, but it is a good illustration of the problems. Colton Herta in Formula 2 was he was nowhere, absolutely nowhere. Now, this guy was a winner in IndyCar, absolutely a winner, and he can't do it. At the moment, he seems completely lost. And I find that really interesting, as a reflection on why is he that far off? What is it? And we've discussed this before, about the various elements that aren't clicking, but it's there and it's not getting better. And that for me was a very significant thing. Let's see how he does at Silverstone. But I'm not expecting a lot more, to be honest.
Yeah, I think it's very, very interesting. I saw the results, I saw the timesheets, and I was like, "What on earth is going on?" I mean, I don't I never expected him to be right at the very tippy top of the timesheets to just come over and blow these guys away, they're too good. But I did not expect him to struggle like that, and there may be a backstory that we're just not aware of, but, it's just sorta like, man, oh, man. My heart goes out to him because, I mean, I know Colton, and, I want to see him succeed on so many different levels, man, he's clearly struggling right now.
Yeah. If anything, I would encourage people to listen to our episode about why there aren't more Americans on the grid, because I think some of the things that you just implied, Joe and Dick, are highlighting is the intentionality of going through the process that gets you through the ladder to get here is the proposition I think that we're seeing. Can you switch disciplines or series or cars and make that transition without having done a lot of the legwork that is the more traditional pathway? But that would get us, if we started going down that trail, we'd be late to our day jobs. So we'll have to just make that either a follow-up conversation, or if our audience wants to hear that or any of the pieces on that, we would love to do another convo on that. So on that note, gentlemen, I say I look forward to our next conversation. Okay, friends, what did you think of our conversation? Drop me a line via email, Sabrina at 2guysagirlandf1.com. Can you help us out? If you haven't already, please take a moment to follow us and give us 5 stars on your favorite podcast app, as well as share this episode with other F1 fans. We know our growth is because of you, and the guys and I thank you. And with that, let me say, we'll keep talking and you can keep listening in, because we're just 2 guys, a girl, and F1. For John, Dick, and me, Sabrina, thanks for listening.